Melanie for having me yet again, inviting me with this lecture series and the opportunity to organize it. And my introduction tonight is really just that. It's trying to introduce the series. Is the mic working? Like this? Better? Yeah. And I would like to add that Melanie Peters came up with a beautiful title, Stof tot nadenken, stuff to think about, which is really what we're trying to go and do throughout the series. Materials are everywhere. They are everywhere around us. We breathe, eat, read material. We even are materials ourselves, and we can never really step outside material. Yet in spite of, or because of their ubiquitous presence, we tend to ignore materials and take them for granted as just the stuff that's there anyways. Current developments in materials science, in engineering and design, however, radically change the materials that surround us, turning them into active agents that make us notice them. Materials are, for instance, endowed with new and amazing qualities that we generally assign to living beings. Window panes adjusting to outside lighting situations, or street markings that change color when the temperature drops below zero in order to warn the cyclist or the driver, are called smart or intelligent materials. Materials used in clothing, jewelry, and mobile devices that can adjust to personal moods through color, sound, or temperature change, and emit and receive signals so as to absorb information and incite contact, are called interactive and therefore social material. Materials also seem to acquire near magical qualities when unbreakable glass, invisible fabric, bulletproof skin, or the lightest metal hitherto developed, called microlattice, defy the very qualities that we would normally recognize them by. We know glass to break, skin to be fragile, and metal to be heavy. And I have some examples up here on the screen for you of the light material and bulletproof skin. Unbreakable glass, which has broken, but the point is that it really resists shattering. And then the intelligent paint on the street that turns into pink when the temperature drops and then turns white again. The Institute of Making, a research institute affiliated with the University College London, is collecting these kinds of materials in a library, and here are their current top 10. In the Netherlands, such a material library is currently being assembled at the Technical University in Delft under the supervision of Dr. Alvin Karana. These newly engineered materials are produced through changes in physical structure and the addition of digital elements on an increasingly smaller scale. In order to understand the impact of these materials on our daily life, more knowledge about their complex makeup is necessary, something that we may call material literacy. However, the enclosed culture of expert communities which develop such materials, material science, engineering, design, tends to inhibit knowledge transmission due to patenting and copyright issues, as well as highly specialized tacit knowledge structures, which follow a long tradition that treats knowledge about materials and their manufacturing as protected and secret. In other words, coming to know about materials and their making is not as easy as we may think. However, this tacit nature of material knowledge is currently challenged on a large scale, and new media play a decisive part in that challenge. Apart from collecting and spreading knowledge about new materials, new media have sparked a renaissance of old materials, such as wood, clay, or paper. These are currently becoming the focal point of a do-it-yourself movement that uses social media to share practical knowledge about old-fashioned things like knitting, gardening, or woodworking, thereby signaling a collective interest in modifying material surroundings hands-on, and thus creating sustainable environments. This development shows that participatory culture, which has mainly been analyzed as an online practice so far, has recently expanded towards offline creation. Therefore, rather than endangering traditional crafts and creativity, as has often been feared, new media are benefiting a new appreciation of craft. And this has two main reasons. Knowledge about materials has traditionally been transmitted through manuals and textbooks adorned with illustrations. These, however, give only a very limited impression of the complexity of material engagement, of the things that we actually do when we make something. Because the sequential structure of language cannot mirror the complex interaction between material, maker, and technologies that characterize creative actions. Just think of a badly written cookbook. That's such an irritating thing. If you follow the instructions and you find out while going along that they're not right and that steps are actually missing. Images, on the other hand, and moving images in particular, can capture the simultaneity that characterizes the interaction with materials. New media make possible the visual documentation of making on a large scale, therefore allowing the exchange of tacit knowledge. The enormous amount of how-to features on YouTube, for instance, alone, prove that this knowledge was craved for and is used by many. There is virtually no activity that has not been filmed in an instructional manner, from baking cake to changing a tire to inserting films in a PowerPoint presentation. But there is another thing that new media do. New media, by facilitating quick social exchange, revive the connective aspect of old-fashioned activities such as weaving, knitting, gardening, or pottering, and charge them with a political meaning as these activities leave the home and become guerrilla knitting and guerrilla gardening. And I'm showing you here an example of this practice of adorning public spaces with knitting, knitted artifacts. The public trying to adorn, to beautify public spaces. The resulting do-it-yourself movement signals a collective want to change material surroundings hands-on and has historical antecedents in the 19th century when the art and crafts movement and the Deutsche Werkbund, which is a comparative movement, were established to protect workers and their craft from the threats that industrialization posed to the aesthetics and ethics of material production, or so they thought. The newly discovered social power of materials is currently paired with the call for open design that entails sharing formally protected product design, for instance through 3D printing, in order to enable the direct local manufacture of devices for diverse usages that would normally be very complicated to get at, that would be very expensive, and that can be now, in an ideal world, be produced right at the place where they're needed. For instance, the production of medical devices, such as prostheses, which can not only be produced in a far more simple way, but can also be personalized. And I would like to show you a quick clip here by a company called Bespoke. They offer personal prosthesis making through 3D printing, and you see here the scanning process to design a perfectly fitting prosthesis, and then also the personalizing, stylizing of that thing into something aesthetically more appealing. And here is a result in a picture. It has been argued that the recent interest in materials is created through an increasing virtualization and therefore immaterialization of our daily lives through new media. I don't think that that is true. I have already argued that new media play an important part in making knowledge about old and new materials explicit. But also, digital media themselves are far from immaterial. Just because we cannot touch a piece of software like we can a piece of wood does not mean that they do not exist in a material form. What rather happens is that by moving analog actions into the digital realm, new material entities are created, the makeup of which is often complicated and challenges the way that we usually expect materials to behave. To give you an example, I can recently, since a couple of months, grade my students through an online system from home, enforcing their grades with an electronic signature by way of a discouraging amount of so-called 10 codes, which you're all familiar with if you do online banking. But I need at least 6 for one student. Still a glitch in the system, I think. The assessment sheet, on the other hand, in which I and a second reader argue why such and such a grade has been given, is only accepted by administration in print and with the analog signature of both readers. This inevitably leads to the fact that the grade that I've given electronically is administered quicker than the argument leading up to it, while on the other hand, a seemingly more authentic weight is granted to this argument, printed and signed, than to the grade. So rather than dematerializing the world, new media change materials and question the meaning we traditionally tend to grant them. Now, while all these newly engineered, intelligent, social, magic, and digital analog amalgamates are enriching our material world, raw materials are becoming short in supply. And global and local developments stimulate the call for sustainable materials, which are produced under ecologically and humane circumstances. These subsequently endow materials with moral and ethical properties, as we become aware and are made aware constantly of what the things we use, eat, or wear are made of and who made them. My jeans, for instance, that I'm wearing tonight, it's the same one as on the picture, guarantee you, are made of organic cotton, but they also have a so-called track and trace system. When I fill in the code in my jeans on a web application, I can find out who sewed them under humane circumstances. I can therefore not only look good, but also feel good in my jeans, or so the company wants me to believe. But have my jeans now become a moral artifact? Such a question, can materials be moral? And all the development and phenomena I have described here so far are interrelated and need to be studied in conjunction. Such a study is necessarily an interdisciplinary endeavor. Materials are at home in many disciplines, ranging from art history to physics, design to anthropology, and material science to biology. So where do we turn for such a study of materials? Do we all need to become physicists, biologists, and designers? That is impossible, of course. We rather need something of a general material theory. Interestingly, the humanities, where such general theories are commonly developed, have, notwithstanding the so-called material turn that signals a great interest in materiality, little to offer thus far. There is abundant knowledge about particular materials, but it is generally perceived as practical wisdom or marginalized and highly specialized subdisciplines. A handbook of material theory, however, one that could be put on a reading list for students who want to know more about the general impact of materials on culture and society at large, who want to enhance their material literacy, so to speak, does not yet exist. The lack of a theory of materials is mainly due to the fact that in the humanities, in Dutch the geesteswetenschappen, the sciences of the mind, if you would directly translate that, root in what Timothy Ingold has described as the hylomorphic paradigm. This is a philosophical model that dates back to Plato and Aristotle, and that describes very simply how the combination of form, hylo, and matter, morph, hylomorphic, produces physical objects. We need matter, and we need a form that matter assumes to become a physical object. Over the centuries, this model has come to be structured in a hierarchical manner in which the idea of the form originates in our mind, or is imposed by a higher order, and is then, in a second step, transferred to the passive matter that is regarded as a means to an end, but not as an active part in the process of making. Consequently, the humanities have focused their research efforts on ideas and concepts, which have become associated with theory, while materials have traditionally been assigned to the domain of practice, or the natural sciences, and have been pursued as an object of intellectual study, rather accidentally only. Recently, though, theoreticians started to research what people working with materials have known all along, that materials dictate as well as enable our actions, and that without an intimate knowledge of materials, no craftsman, artist, software programmer, or surgeon could do his job well. Even the most abstract of professions, the mathematician, is fond of the materials he needs to think with, a drawing board and chalk, essential still to all higher math classes. In the 1970s, the psychologist James Jerome Gibson developed a theory that describes the active role of materials in our lives really well. He called it the theory of affordances. In a nutshell, the theory of affordances signifies that the properties of a substance or material offer us to perform particular actions with them. Hence, as Gibson writes, the earth offers us the possibility to walk upon. Air affords us to breathe. A chair affords us the possibility to sit in it. And stones afford us not only the building of shelter, but also the destruction of shelter. To think in affordances simply means to turn the cause and effect chain, the notion that I have an idea and that idea produces a thing, eventually, around and assume the perspective of materials. Take, for instance, paper. Paper affords wrapping and protecting things. It affords writing upon and consequently storing information. It also affords folding, and maybe some of you have folded a fox with a sheet of paper you were handed when you walked in. I've tried. But of course I had some time practicing. I guarantee you it's possible. What you have done then was not imposing an origami design onto a material, but you have engaged with one of the chief affordances of paper, encountering its resistance, and the intricate movements of folding. Maybe realize that paper can be treated in a sculptural way, which we are usually not used to doing, and have experienced that folding paper asks of you to employ your visual and haptic senses simultaneously. This fox, then, is not the result of an idea, but of ideas and materials mingling. I hope that the jumble of materials I have presented to you has inspired you to think about materials and become aware of the role materials play in our lives. The series we are about to embark upon will give you, literally, stuff to think about, stof tot nadenken. As all those material properties I have touched upon, magical, smart, social, digital, moral, and many more, will be discussed in interdisciplinary encounters, which promise to be very inspiring indeed. And by the end of this series, I hope we have moved towards a definition of what material literacy may be.